So welcome back to YUVC, guys. So Andrea is creator turned angel LP and the founder of EUVC, Europe's community for venture insiders, which means GP, LP, etc. Andrea hosts the European Venture Capital podcast, is a venture partner with Iceman Capital, and an active angel in various European early stage funds. So Andrea, for us and people outside Europe, you are really our first touching point understanding venture capital in Europe. So we are really excited to have you here with us today, though halfway around the world.
I'm just happy that you invited me. I'm always super excited about being on the other side of the team.
That's great. So with 7 hours of time difference, let's just get started, okay? So
Absolutely.
firstly, I'm really curious about your journey into VC. So do you agree with the saying that we, like one of our past guests said? So there are two types of people who want to get into VC. So one type is super smart and super capable, and the other pillar are those who are super naive. And which type do you believe you are?
Definitely the naive type. uh, Speaking of that statement, right? I think there's truth and there's not truth to it. And let me start by how I think about it when it comes to emerging managers, meaning people that choose to raise their own funds. And that's, of course, I do that because I have the LP perspective on most things that I think about. I was helping raise a fund in Denmark, and in doing so, I realized a couple of very important things. I realized that the LP landscape, the people that allocate to venture funds, are incredibly sophisticated people when it comes to their core business. Many of them are business owners and very successful. They can be lawyers, or they can be accountants, or they can be executives, or they can be business owners of a steel manufacturer or anything, right? And in this, they're incredibly good. That's where they've made their money. But then a venture guy comes along and wants to raise money from them. And oftentimes a VC is typically very inspiring because there are people that are all about technology, they're all about the future, they're all about, all the things that we're very much hyping up
Yeah.
in society right now. So this is incredibly exciting to almost anyone, right? And at the same time, they're typically also quite good salespeople. At least many of them are. And the pitching process is basically a sales process. And this is really not a good situation when you pair that you have a very sophisticated salesperson that is selling something that's hyped in the market to someone who's used to being very sophisticated themselves, but is now looking at buying something that they have never really bought before. Then you have this meeting between where it can almost only go wrong. uh, because the sophisticated salesman will be able to sell to the unsophisticated buyer, which means that you then end up having a systemic level in venture, a situation where we not only have a power law for the startups, which means that some will generate outsized returns and the majority will not generate much. But on the venture side, on the fund side, we have almost the exact same curve, with some funds performing incredibly well, giving back 5x, 7x, 10x, and then a long tail of funds that do give back the money that they invest, but typically not too much more. And
So is
and
there
that
such
is
like precise data that shows how many percent of the funds in Europe return like the DPI is less than one?
so that data does exist, but it's typically very flawed, because we don't have very good benchmarks, to be honest. So I don't wanna come up with statistics here, but it is power law shaped like it is on the startup side, which means that we're looking at 10% or so, 15% that perform incredibly well in any vintage. And then you have another quarter basically that's, or if you have the 10, 15% that do incredibly well, then you have another 20, 30% that deliver around 2x, up from 2 to 3x, which is kind of where you would want them to be. A good venture fund should typically return 3x, then you're happy with your investment. And then you have it slowly declines as you go out. But that means that the average venture fund is not a good fund to invest in, right? With the risk profile that you have, you would actually want to allocate to something else. And I think that this is exactly because the VCs are naive, so they fall in that category that you described. But even worse, the LPs are naive, meaning the people that are basically giving the money to the VCs to invest. They are too often unsophisticated buyers of the product, which means many of them will only have met 3 or 5 VCs before they choose who they allocate to. Some people refer to this phenomena as cousin investing or uncle investing or whatever, or brother-in-law investing, because you invest in someone who you for some reason know and have a belief will be able to do something, not because you're a very sophisticated investor in this space. And we're going to talk more about that, I'm sure. There's a bunch of reasons why venture is so prone for this to happen. One important thing is this, that you have a salesperson that's selling a very hype product as it is in the market right now, because everyone talks about tech and the future and so on. And that is a very dangerous mix. So when you ask me, are people smart and capable or super naive? Even if you're smart and capable, you're not necessarily a great venture investor, not a top tier venture investor, because everyone who raises a fund are smart and capable, but they are
Yeah.
it just takes so much more than being smart and capable to be a good VC.
Yeah, especially when people, especially VCs, are self-reportedly more smarter than they really are.
We are we all believe that about ourselves, right? We have tons of studies showing, are you a better, don't, everyone will answer, I think I'm a better driver than anyone else.
Yeah, right.
And the same thing goes, of course, for investing.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, the power law you mentioned reminds me of a saying by Kawasaki, one of our previous guests. So he said, "So venture capital is business where you invest in 20 and 3 would randomly win out, and the rest 17 you will blame your stupid partner has invested in that." And we know that is joking, but it's quite funny that you said that.
Yeah, no, but that's the power law, right? I think that guy, as you say, he's clearly joking. But I think he makes it another important point there, which, and it's probably not intended with what he says here. But as LPs, this is something we think about a lot when we invest into funds. Meaning, what's the dynamic between the two partners? Because the last thing you want is to be investing in a partnership where there's issues between one partner and the other. So if you if you actually had the dynamic of, I think I did all the right things and the other one did all the bad things, you probably won't be around for too long in venture. That's I think that's just interesting, and it's something that we very much care about as LPs.
So how you came across the VC industry? Why you choose VC?
And so it actually dates all the back. Let me share something about myself and my personality. I love anything. I love getting really deep on anything and committing myself to it. When I was a kid, I played a lot of World of Warcraft. I played hours and hours and hours. I made it to be field marshal for anyone that's old enough to know what that means. And that is a personality trait that has followed me all through my life. So when I was then at university, I got to be close with the entrepreneurial ecosystem and with the development of the university. I was elected student president and got very close with the vice chancellor developing.
Sorry, one question mark. So is entrepreneurship ecosystem university really considered entrepreneurship in a real sense?
Yes, it's certainly entrepreneurship, right? Is it the place where unicorns are born? Not necessarily, right? But it can be. You never know where if there's anything I know, right, is that you don't know where the next big thing will come from. Do university incubators oftentimes do the absolutely wrong things when it comes to creating unicorns? Absolutely, right? Because it's a very elitist game. You typically have universities that are trying to instill educational lessons, building up different personality traits in students, which is not something that you would care about at all if you were just looking for the next breakout company founder, right? There you just say, I want to see all of them. And if any of them doesn't show up at 4 a.m. when we're doing a stupidly crazy exercise, that means that they're not in it for real, and we can just drop them, right? Because you as quick as possible want to test for grit in those founders, right? You do the opposite in university, right? But to get back to my story, right? So I got very close with the university. The university then, the vice chancellor asked if I wanted to help build the incubator of the university. I joined there. Then I joined from there. I joined a government-backed fund, and then I helped raise private funds, a couple of private funds in Denmark, venture funds. And along this way, I met David, actually in Madrid, of all places. And then we started our podcast entirely as outsiders, in the sense that I was not a key person in Danish venture at all, much less in European venture. And I think that if there's anything that this speaks to, it's that anyone can build their way into venture if they want to. It's just a matter of being methodic. And then going back to, I think the question that you asked earlier, whether you're naive if you want to do venture or not, I don't think you are. I think you're naive if you think that you can just go and do venture. Venture is just as being an entrepreneur. It is an elite sport. It's something that you really need to have bled to be able to do well. But it's definitely something that anyone, of course, with a capable mind and grit can do. I think I got asked the other day by a young guy, 17-year-old, who wanted to become a VC. And then oftentimes, many of us that forget about it, you're not going to be. I think that's the wrong thing. I think what you can do is you can, as someone wanting to break into venture, you can go and find great accomplished VCs that's your personality traits with yourself. And then you can say, okay, what's their journey? What have they done? And when I say personality traits with yourself, it's because venture can be done in so many different ways. Some are deep tech nerds that have never seen anything but the inside of a laboratory. And then you have some that are God-given networkers and wouldn't know anything. They wouldn't know a microscope from a Petri, whatever those are called, right? In the lab, right? So it can be done in so many different ways, which means that anyone can also access it. It's just a matter of finding someone who shares the traits that you have and then charting out their journey so that you can then start on that journey for yourself as well. I think it's also said that the start of a few story, right? Take a look at the resources, the capabilities, the network that are readily available to you, and then build from that. Will you be in venture in a year or 2 or 3? Maybe not. Will you be able to be in venture at the end of this journey? Absolutely. But some things take time. And obviously, you don't just break into an elite sport by saying, okay, I want to do that tomorrow.
So I'll definitely recommend our audiences to watch the episodes at EUVC, right? With hundreds of VCs breaking to venture.
Yeah, so we always start their journey, of course, but typically we talk to emerging GPs and established GPs. So that means that these are the super senior guys, right? And the journey is always something from either I founded this, I angel invested, now I do my own fund. Or it's I was in banking and then I joined this venture firm, or I got tired of banking, or I got tired of private equity. I fell in love with venture, and then I joined this big firm, which is typically the profile that I just described, many big firms would hire from. And then I joined this great firm. I built my own thesis around X, Y, or Z that I really believe in, but it doesn't really match the firm I'm in. And for that reason, I'm breaking out to do my own thing. Or many also come from being whatever that then gets them into a family office, which then allows them to invest for some time off the back of that family office. And then they spin out, or they take the family office and convert it into a full-time venture thing.
Yeah, there's just so many potential trajectories and career paths.
Yeah.
So actually, Andrea, I'm quite curious. Sorry.
I love that we have our dog with us here. What's his name?
Well, in Chinese, it's called 小哈. So in English, just like hus for husky.
Small
really?
husky. Yeah.
I like that.
Get lost, Hus.
Don't get lost. I don't.
Okay, stay here.
He's very charismatic on camera because it's so colorful, huskies, and it's so
Yeah,
clearly
nice.
delineated.
So yeah, just stay here, but don't bite you. Yeah, okay. Okay, cool. So I'm quite curious, Andreas. So why do you only focus on VCs and LPs but not founders? As you see, like on the value chain. So it's like I'm not saying like absolutely, but like LP they invest in VCs and then they invest in founders, right? And why
Yeah.
like up the value ladder?
There's always fun with that ladder, right? Because some describe it as you just did, because they say where does the money flow from, and that's kind of then how you think about it and who's on the board of who. Okay, yes, the VC is on the board of the founder, so that means that, and they are the ones that get to make the calls in the sense that they decide who gets money, and then the LPs are the ones that decide which VCs should get money. You could put it like that. And many do, but you can also, and this is maybe the more marketing oriented way of putting it, which is the opposite way around, where you say that the founders are the ones that are stars, the ones that can really, do breakout things that changes the world. The VCs are the ones that are so lucky that they get to support them and back them and hopefully make some money on that. And then the LPs are on the bottom. We know nothing. We don't have any special capability or anything other than we have access to some capital that we can put into these VCs and then put it into the
I
founders.
see. Like the founder, the service provider or capital provider, right?
Yeah.
And their capital provider.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm probably, at least when I think about who are the ones that are putting in the real work, who are the ones that are the true enigmas, that's definitely the successful breakout founders. And then probably secondarily the VCs, and finally the LPs.
Sure. If there are no founders, then there's no venture capital industry.
Yeah. So your question was why VCs and LPs and not founders? So first of all, there's a very specific set of reasons to this, and it kind of comes back to what we just spoke about before, which is what are your main resources and capabilities? What are you actually able to do? I know VC. I don't know tech. I have been in a venture fund where we invested direct. It didn't take too long for a deep tech founder to see me completely lost. So I am very humble about the fact that I would not be a good direct investor. And I think that a lot of people would do better if they recognize that. And then I also think that the risk reward profile of investing into funds is just much better than it is investing in direct. And that's because if you go direct, as we spoke about that power law curve, if you do direct, you need to have typically 30 shots on goal. And that's even if you're a good VC, you want to have 20, 30 shots on goal. And then hopefully in that, you'll have some breakout companies that make it all worth it. If you do fund investments and you do 10 funds or 20 funds, then you will be almost 100% sure, unless you're a very, very bad picker, that you'll have more than 1x. So there's not really that risk of losing all your money. But if you do it well, you can do 2, 3, maybe even 4x across that full portfolio. And for that reason, it's more meaningful for us. Then finally, as you described us in the beginning, we are big time creators and community builders in European venture, which also means that we have a lot of time dedicated to that. So we can really afford the time that it would take for us to also do direct. When we do direct investments, we do them as co-invests together with our funds, which means that we have this pre-diligence deal flow and we have this gatekeeper between us and the direct investment, which is a fund manager that we've already said, I trust you with my money. Now you also have this opportunity for me to double down on a specific asset. And then those come to us much more rarely than an average direct investment would come to us. So for that reason, we can then spend the time there and we have a trusted partner that we can spar with around that opportunity.
Understood.
Then if I should just say one thing about why I think venture capital is so interesting, so exciting to me, it's that I've always been fascinated by people that are high capacity, incredibly driven, have always had my passion. I could spend hours and hours and hours with these people. And for that reason, doing what I'm doing now is all about that, right? Because a VC that's doing good will have this profile. And at the same time, I'm also incredibly future oriented. So I'm always, when my wife asks me, so what did you do today? Or whatever, right? I have no idea. I didn't end up for some reason recall it. I'm always amazed when I can ask other people, so what did you do today? And then I get like, I did X, Y, Z, boom, boom, boom. I'm like, I don't even remember that. I have no idea if you ask me. But if you ask me, what do I think about the risks of nuclear war? I'll have a pretty thought out thesis on that. If I don't have it, I would love to dive into a multiple hour conversation with you where we build out that thesis together. So I'm very future oriented, and that's what venture is all about. And that's why as I say, when I talk about backing people, that's why I do venture and not private equity or another place where you would be picking people.
Eventually, it's people business. So, Andrea, I'm quite curious, like according to MBTI, so which type of personality you are? Is it like ENFJ or stuff like that?
Oh, I think I am, and this is really so. I'm not big into these personality profiles, and it's probably been 10, 15 years since I took one. But I think I can recall me being an ENTP or ENTI or something like that.
It's said like the great leaders are either ENTJ or INTJ, like Elon Musk, right?
Yeah,
Or like Steve Jobs, stuff like that, Tim
yeah.
Cook.
I love to be like them, but I don't think I am. I can interview people like them, and I can put money behind them.
I love ENTP.
Yeah.
And I know it's difficult for you to maintain a platform like this. So in the beginning, how did you realize the flywheel effect to let the VCs attract more LPs and LPs attract VCs and more people on it?
Yeah, so it's exactly as you described it, right? We have this base premise that the better VCs and LPs that we get as guests on the podcast and in the content that we create, the bigger our community will grow, both in terms of audience and in terms of community members, meaning people that invest with us, basically. And that will then allow us to get better sponsors and advertisers, which then again allows us to double down on everything else so that that flywheel works. In building that flywheel, I really think that the magic is only that you keep being focused on that flywheel and building it out and not doing anything that adds complexity, because then it gets too difficult, the gears break down in the flywheel. And then also just never shine or going down avenues where you're building something out that's super exciting and could be incredible, but doesn't add into the flywheel. And this is of course incredibly important to us because we're a two-person band, right? We don't really want to be big. We will for sure add people along the way. We have two freelancers with us. So we will do it, but we do it very diligently. And being a two-person band, obviously, it's also important for the beautiful flywheel of Amazon. It's what allows Amazon to be Amazon. So it's also important in the corporate context. But if you're a two-person band, you very quickly realize if things that you're doing aren't additive and aren't complementary between each other.
Yeah. So what was the hardest thing building this flywheel effect, like along the way?
Oh, I think the hardest thing in the beginning was figuring out ways to just allowing us to stick with it. In the beginning, us being creators, of course, if you don't have an audience, and you guys know this, right? If you don't have an audience, you don't have anything you can monetize. So for that reason, the difficult thing was keeping that eye on when does the money run out and where are there monetization opportunities along the way that we can capitalize on without doing something that doesn't add to the flywheel. We'd always make money on doing pure consulting work, but it would just mean if we did a pure consulting gig that was not connected to what we were building, that hour would get us money and extend our runway, but it wouldn't be additive to what we're building. So keeping that constant eye and focus and saying, no to things that can extend runway, but which would remove focus. Today, the difficult thing is picking what to do, picking what not to do, because being two people that have done 300 episodes, have invested in 10, 12 funds now, and being, I think, important gatekeepers to many people in the ecosystem, we obviously have opportunities everywhere. The question is, which ones do you pick? One, is it worthwhile to do something that doesn't generate cash, strengthens our position? And when do you have to say no to it because it's just, if I'm not making a dime there, I can't do it.
Any chance you're telling us an exciting opportunity that you have turned down?
We turn down very exciting investment opportunities all the time. It would be like, there's so many problems. We have more great VCs than we have capital to allocate. That goes for the ecosystem in general in Europe, and it goes for us specifically. So far too often do I find myself meeting someone I would wish I could invest in, but where I just had to say, I can't mobilize the capital right now. Then, if I should say one that we have decided to do, but when we decided to do it, there was no clear trajectory to making money on it, I would say it's the European VC Awards. But we had built the European VC Awards it's the inaugural run this year. It's the awards that will hopefully become the seminal awards that say who are the best VCs in Europe. We had the position when we started working on this to bring together the right partnership group around it, meaning that we knew we could build something that the ecosystem would, when we announced it, accept it as, yes, this is a real and important initiative for the ecosystem. And it's not, random. It's not just a small award. It's going to be the main award.
Mhm.
But at that time, we
Not a
didn't
copycat
have...
of the Midas Europe.
Yeah, exactly. But exactly. And of course, the Midas list being definitely more US heavy, but also just that the Midas list is purely about net worth. There's definitely other things factored into the awards that we do, not soft, squishy things, but it just takes more than net worth of an individual to be a great VC. We also focus more on the firms than the individuals. That said, we do have Hall of Fame, which of course is an individual. But that was an opportunity that is obviously taking quite some time out of our weeks, and one that we don't make much money on. Now we are selling sponsorships for it, but we didn't know whether we would be able to in the beginning. So now it does make sense from a pure financial perspective as well. But making that call in the beginning, okay, we'll do this and we might not make any money on it this year, that's a decision you have to make, right?
Yeah, indeed.
So where do you see EUVC in 5 years?
It will be like the 9th year of EUVC, right?
Yes. Well, we'll be partying then. It's funny how at the same time as I'm a person that thinks a lot about the future, I don't plan really for the future. I would much rather say that I open windows of opportunity and I pursue them. And if there's a good tailwind, those will end up flying. If there's not, they'll end up dying. And for that reason, I can't say where we will be in 5 years, but I can say that it'll be more of the same. Because we do everything with an eye to becoming the most well-respected VC community in Europe. And that's in the form of podcasts, educational courses, dinners, survival trips, fund investments. It's that everything that's around building community in European venture, that is going to be bigger and stronger. But exactly where it is, I don't know. Will we have done 50 investments or 20? I don't know, right? Probably more along the lines of 50.
So though we are just barely starting, and I foresee like more partnership that we making, like when we make more presence in Asia, and then potentially more opportunities to cooperate in the future as well.
I'd love to cooperate more with you guys because I love what you guys are doing. I think you're building a thing that's not too dissimilar from us. Or I would actually maybe say you're building something that could end up being very, very similar. And for that reason, I'd love to do more with you guys.
Yeah, but like the similarity is a good thing, like because like your business model is verified, but like USP or differentiation is always something very important. Like we don't really want to be exactly the copycat, right? And it's like morally, unethical, but that's strong word. But anyway, but yeah, both of us are really trying to contribute to the ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah, I should say that you're very, very nice man. And if I use Chinese, I can say more beautiful words for you, but my
Yeah.
English is not as good as you guys.
No, but I am a very nice man. So on the copycat part, I think our model is built around David and I, and what we enjoy, and what we're good at, and what our ecosystem needs. And as such, yours will be the same. And if you share, and how much you'll end up looking like us will be contingent on how much you overlap with us, right? And how much the Asian ecosystem overlaps with us. But we've always said, David and I, that what we've done in Europe that's needed in MENA, in Africa, and in Asia. And whether there's a need for 2 or 3 in Asia, I don't know, right? Because it depends a bit on how fragmented the market is. The beautiful thing about Europe is that everyone in Europe pretty much thinks, at least if you're a real VC in Europe, you think about Europe as one market. You might be then focusing especially on the Berlin ecosystem because you're investing there. So that's where you put 90 or 80% of your time, but you still have to broaden your horizon, and that's where you then very quickly think about the rest of Europe. And I imagine it's something similar to that in Asia as well. Obviously, with China being the behemoth, that's one big market, and then you have the others that are smaller. We have the same thing in Europe, obviously, or not the same, but similar, with the UK, Germany, France being the main ecosystems here. And then we have the Nordics coming up. We have Portugal, Spain. We have Eastern Europe. We have DACH being very strong together with Berlin or Germany, right? Um, I think there's very many similarities in that we have on the global scale emerging ecosystems that are not yet where the US ecosystems are. We will always be different from the US ecosystem because the US ecosystem is almost, or 80% or whatever is on the same road, or at least in the same city. And we will never be. Digital will always be incredibly important in Europe because we will be spread thin. And the more tight knit our communities get across border, the stronger our ecosystem. And it's absolutely integral because you have, at the same time as you have a funding crunch or a lag of funding to the startups, you also have just a lack of searchability or visibility across the ecosystem, so that you might have something in one ecosystem that can't really find funding, but which, if it was in another or was more plugged into another, would have been able to raise. And that goes both for a VC firm as it goes for a startup. And for that reason, anything that you can do to make things better or more easily transcend borders is incredibly important in ecosystems that are more fragmented.
Yeah, since Europe is not really a single big unified market, so Asia is worse. And I guess, according to your words, there's more opportunity here in Asia.
It's the opposite, right? It's not worse, it's better from an opportunity perspective.
Worse and better.
Yeah.
So, Andrea, I'm also very excited to learn more about you being an angel LP. So, since you're a venture partner at Untitled Capital, an investor LP at Seedcamp, Curiosity VC, Altitude, and other amazing emerging VC funds. So some may wonder, from a creator turned angel LP. So what is magic that made you to connect and bridge those LPs and GPs?
When we pick who comes on the podcast, quite a few. We're doing 2 per week, 300 in total so far. So for that reason, we don't have as sharp criteria as we do on our fund investments. But in a way, it's similar, right? Because if a random VC comes from Slovenia and wants to come on the podcast, which 5 does every week, I'm gonna not just say yes, right? I'm gonna see who will be the best guest on the podcast, and then I pick that out of the 5 guys from Slovenia. And in that way, that's the same thing we do on our fund investing side. If we of course get approached by hundreds of funds every year, and out of those we pick the ones that we believe are the best, both from a financial perspective, from a partnership perspective. Partnership in many ways translates into co-investment opportunity perspective, meaning can the people that invest in that fund be able to co-invest along the way? Can we, David and Andreas, as creators and community builders in the ecosystem, leverage that fund investment in some ways? We're doing many things with the funds we invest in. As an example, the co-host that we have for our Super Angel podcast series is a general partner at Seedcamp. So that's one way where that only came into being after we did our fund investment, right? Because we committed to each other and we committed to the partnership. I think you also asked what's the magic or what allows me to do this. And I think that there's no magic to me as a person. There's a magic to me as someone who has a focus and has said, I'll spend my 50 hours per week that I work on building this. I won't build anything else. And when I'm done working and with my family, I'm still thinking about making this flywheel better.
So as you mentioned, like the partners, the dynamics between the partners will be super important and interesting. Like what kind of interesting dynamics that you have seen in those funds that you invested in?
So the dynamic between partners are incredibly important. I won't say anything about the dynamic between the partners that we have invested in, but I'll say something about the managers that we look at. This means that when you invest in someone or in a team, you're investing in a team that you really want to be able to work together for a long time. And that, of course, makes it very important that you can see that these guys have a healthy dynamic between them, that they actually respect each other, that they have worked together, that they've gone through hard things together. Because in most funds, both GPs or all GPs are essential to making the whole fund work. One might be more focused on the investing side, might be more focused on building out the platform side. And if the whole model is built around, if the firm thesis is that this firm will be one of the next big, great blue chip firms, and you don't have someone very senior that cares more about the operations and the building out the platform team, then it's probably not going to be one of the big next blue chip firms, because that's a hard thing to build out and you don't do that serendipitously. It doesn't just come from itself. And this is the tough part when it comes to being a non-VC specialized LP. If you're going to diligence a partnership and and of course you're going to do reference checking. If you do that as a non-specialized VCLP, you'll have to go to people that you don't know already and ask them basically to rat someone that is already in the ecosystem. And that is a tough position to be in, right? Because most people would rather not be very forthcoming or truthful in giving that reference and not risking saying anything bad about someone who in the end is in the ecosystem and is going around also affecting your own journey, right?
So do you have any solutions to this day?
Yeah, but there's nothing else you can do than be embedded. If you're not embedded in the ecosystem, you can't get truthful references. You can if you're able to build leverage on someone, right? Or you're able to build strong relationships nonetheless, that will then allow you to reference check in a good way. But what you really want to do is you want to be, I think, as an LP that doesn't do fund investments in venture all the time, I do not see why you would not have a fund of fund allocation inside your venture, because that would allow you, at least in the beginning until you get embedded, it would allow you to have a trusted partner that when you start looking at funds yourself directly, you can then say, we're looking at these guys. What do you think? And you don't, a fund of fund in Europe will typically say no to many great VCs that they would love they could back, but they have to make 5 bets in Nordics, not 20. And for that reason, there's 15 that they didn't allocate to. And maybe they didn't allocate to them because one of them did deep tech and they already had another deep tech fund that had somewhat of an overlap in the geo. So for that reason, they would actually rather add in a consumer-focused one. That might be the situation, right? So for that reason, you can't just follow a fund of fund either and say, well, I just copy, because you'll have different reasons to build your portfolio in the way that you do.
And so what are those commonalities of great or promising VC funds or managers that you could see in Europe, especially?
So I think there's two ways to answer your question. There's what are the commonalities for a great VC, and then there's what are the trends that are coming up in Europe or that are being more and more prominent here. If I start at the first thing, and if we focus on the emerging VCs, what I would say is it's so clear to me that there's two very different types of emerging VCs. They're the ones where it's almost like the fund is ready to go. All they're lacking is, or the firm is ready to go, all they're lacking is the capital to invest. That meaning they have a great network, they have a build out thesis, they have done some angel investments, everything is just in place so that when you give them $1 million, they're ready to move. And then there are the ones that are like, I'm going to build a venture partner network. I'm going to build my thought leadership within fintech. I am going to know all the blah, 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 right? And it's like, that's all good and great. Go and do that and then come and ask for money in 3 years. And that's a very, very big change. There's a guy in Romania, as an example, that I love to draw out for this type of example, which is Bogdan with Underline Ventures. He raised his own solo GP.
I've cold emailed him,
Huh?
but he ignored me.
Sorry?
I've cold emailed him, but he ignored me.
Oh, really? What a bitch. No, that's just, again, if there's anything that VCs have, it's a huge inbox, right? I'll make the intro, then he won't ignore you.
Perfect.
But he's a great example because he founded How to Web, which is the main go-to conference in Romania and really Eastern Europe, I think in many ways, at least Southern Eastern Europe. That means that he would have all the founders in the region coming to that conference, and he would have had that for 10 years. And he would have all the leading VCs come to his conference, which means they already know him and they love him. Same thing with all the angels. So when he then sets out to build a firm and really leverage everything he's built for 10 years, that's a good guy to back, right? Then you, of course, want to make sure that he actually knows how to invest, that he knows how to help, blah, blah, blah. But it's like the infrastructure is in place. All the prerequisites are in place for this fund to be a success, provided that he, as a person, is also a good manager, right? That's probably the main and most important thing. We've had during boom times in venture, we had a lot of people raising funds with very limited knowledge of the dynamics of portfolio construction, which means they wouldn't, and basically just good fund management, which means you'd have people raising that weren't very knowledgeable about the importance of discipline, the importance of why you can't do pre-seed and only do 10 investments. Like, you might think it's cool and that you can pick the right ones, but you need to be incredibly sophisticated to be able to make such concentrated bets in the very, very early stages, and so on and so forth. So that portfolio construction side of knowing the consequences and how of every decision that you might make and why they're important and how they interact. A lot of people that raised capital in the boom times, or not a lot of them, but we had a significant inflow of that type of investor that was not very, very good for the ecosystem. And then if I were to say something about specifically the trends, new trends that we're seeing growing in Europe, it's definitely which Bogdan is one example of, more solo GPs. Many of them are very, very strong. They're basically supercharged angel. Then we have more specialized firms. So deep tech, AI, climate, also some very interesting diversity-focused funds. If you focus on diversity, you're focusing on overlooked minorities, meaning you're focusing on the things that, for some reason, biases of the bigger cohort block, or they don't have network into them, that type of thing. And then we're also starting to see more later stage funds or firms in Europe, which is great because that's something we've been missing. It's great from an ecosystem perspective. It's great from a growth of the wealth in the region. And then of course it's also great because these funds will be very well positioned to generate great outsized returns. And then Eastern Europe is also a region that I'm very bullish on, and that's because they have great tech talent. They are starting to have those great breakout companies that are bringing out new founders and new angels, so they're building a breeding ground. And of course, in this case, Romania, which is the country Bogdan is most active in as well, with UiPath, they're the poster board for this because that ecosystem is just skyrocketing. Those are the biggest trends I see. And then I think we have a bit of what some might think it's an overflow thing from 2021, which is a lot of fund of funds as well. And I think anyone looked like they could find gold in 2021, so they started raising funds there because how hard is this? I think we'll have a shakeout in that in the next 2-3 years.
Yeah, I'm just curious and coming up with the stupidest questions of this episode, like how many VC funds are there in Europe?
If we talk about funds, there's probably 5,000-ish. But every firm has somewhere between 2, 3, 4 funds, right? Probably the average around 2.5 or 3. So you can then do the math and say, okay, then we're down to around 2,000 firms. This very much also goes back to when I say that venture is fragmented and venture is the high performers and the low performers to some extent. And there's the A team and the B team, or however you want to call it. If you're part of the A team, if you're part of that in group that is doing very well and that are networked and everything, I think you can sometimes forget, because that number oftentimes surprises people. But that's because we have so many funds that are not very well performing and not very well plugged in, but nonetheless they still register as a VC fund, right? And I think that's what's also hiding behind that power law curve, and the reason why venture isn't heralded more as an amazing asset class, simply because we have too many unsophisticated LPs that do bad picks, and too many not good fund managers that are allowed to stay in business because of that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So back to maybe this first section. So how did you, at the very beginning, right? Did you adopt a bottom-up approach that you really, came up with a list of 3,000 venture firms, and okay, this seems interesting, I'll send a cold email, and no, or just start with someone you already know, or it's like a mix of these two approaches?
So it's not worthwhile putting together 3,000 listed.
Just a metaphor. Okay.
But it's always a mix, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just as soon as you create one node in the network, you jump to another one from that node, or 5 others from that node. So it's about moving to the network model as quick as you can, and then starting, as I said, by just trying to understand the market better.
It's about accumulating the data points and build the network effect and scale on that.
Yeah, and just because we always talk about venture being herd behavior, and people acting out of FOMO, but it's also just because it's a very effective sifting mechanism. And that's on the fund investing side, though. It's very different when it comes to the startup side, because startups are much more binary. You want to get in early. You want to get in before the others. You want to be able to take up as much as you can of the round if you really believe in it, or at least a good chunk, which if you're waiting for Sequoia to come in, it'll be higher priced, it'll be incredibly competitive, so you might even lose it. And you won't show to anyone that you've built thought leadership or conviction in anything, because you just did what Sequoia did. And so on and so forth. And most importantly, you won't get the ownership percentage at a good price, which is of course the consequence of everything I just said, which will be detrimental to your performance results, right? If that thing that you just invested in is backed by Sequoia, you're damn sure you got a low percentage, it was at a high price, and that best case is not going to be as big as if you had done that investment on your own and could have been the price setter and taking up a good share of the round. Did you ask more?
Sure. Jan has still some questions to ask.
So, what's the meaning of life?
The last
I love
part.
these questions. No, thank you. Thank you for going directly to the most important question. So I actually think a lot about this. I think I've kind of coined the term in my own mind of something that I call life design. And I think that what is the meaning of life is different for everyone, right? I don't think anyone can answer that question for anyone else. For me, I've said that there's basically four things, and it's pretty much in this order. Ensure the foundation of a bright future for my children, ensure my wife's happiness, add to the world, and finally, ensure my own happiness. And the reason why I'm putting myself last is because I've done some work with myself and made sure that I align my own values and goals in life with the first three. So the first three are basically a product of what I think will make myself happy. So if I know that the two children that I've been part of giving life to, if I know that they are flying the nest good and healthy and that they're going into the world with a solid foundation and that I've provided, and this is part of why I work a lot, that I've provided a good financial footing for them and a fallback option should they not be able to fly themselves, then I know that I should be very fulfilled myself. If I know that the person who has chosen to spend her life with me is happy, I know that I can also rest better with myself when I'm happy or when I'm not happy or when we're together. I know we'll have better times together because she's happy, right? And finally, at least for me, there's a chip on my shoulder to do something that's meaningful for the world as well. I don't think it's about me giving anything up because I think it's about making myself happy with myself. I don't think in any way that I'm less self-centric than anyone else. Um, I think we're all terrible people, but we can do some work with ourselves so that at least the things that we have inside of us, the drive we have, we put to work in the best possible way. But in the end, put us up against each other about one plate of food and nothing else, I think we're all terrible people.
That's quite interesting. So actually, Andreas, you share a similar philosophy of some ancient Chinese saints.
Oh, really?
Children first, and then wife, then self.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, well, I've visited China once. I've been in Shanghai and Beijing for 2 weeks-ish. It was definitely an experience that sits with me. It was also an experience that I'm in many ways sorry that I had at the time and I didn't have with my current level of sophistication in thinking and understanding the world, because I think that China has so much more to offer than what I got when I was there for 2 weeks at that time. And that's because I think that there's a humility to understanding a culture and a society that's so different from your own, and an approach and pre-work to really be able to cherish and let the experience sink in sufficiently. I'm looking forward to go back at some point where I where I have the time to really understand. Because you said, you guys have the oldest culture of all of us, and you have some of the biggest thinkers that has ever been around, and your ancient philosophy is one that I think many in Europe and the West are only starting to rediscover. Sometimes it's repackaged by a self-declared guru. Other times they actually do say, "Well, I read this in a book about the yogi way of life." um,
Yeah, I guess I wish we're already on the journey to make like the world scene, or maybe that's too big word, but we're trying to be that bridge to bring more Chinese insights to the world. Andrea, any words that you want to say to your younger self, like just graduating from university?
So graduating from university, I think I did the right thing. I jumped on the best possible opportunity that I could at the time, so that was right for me. But I do think that I should have 2 years earlier started EUVC, and this is the message for everyone: as soon as you can, build your own thing, because with the tools that we have at hand, like ChatGPT, whatever generative AI solution you want to use, you can very, very easily provide more value than anyone inside a corporate that's a slow adopter. And for that reason, you'll be so many times more efficient as a standalone agent than you would be employed inside a firm. I think it beats me why someone can be in consulting knowing what their clients are being charged per hour, and then they stay employed in that consulting firm. Because like, does McKinsey really add 7, 10, whatever X to your hourly rate? Like, is it really that valuable? And that's the thing about agency. 90% think they don't have it. But in the end, of course they do. In most, and this is of course directed at at Western European countries, but I know that we have good social safety nets. You can, as a good, well-educated person, very quickly, if you live just the slightest bit sparingly, you can very quickly amass the capital to buy yourself a year or two of runway where you don't really need to make any money, but you can just build your own thing. And if you can't build a consulting firm or whatever you want to build in 2 years, fair game. Okay, you probably shouldn't be an entrepreneur. You probably should just go and be employed somewhere. But fuck, take the bet, go and do it. And if it doesn't work, go back. You got that experience. At least you took a swing at it.
Any advice you could give to YUVC or just letter differences?
Your agent,
YUVC and EUVC.
your agent copycat.
Yeah. No, be my copycat. I've also, to the audience who doesn't know this, we've had multiple talks already, right? Where I open my book and say, this is how we do things. Because I don't see you in any way as a competitor. I would just wish you all the best. If we end up doing things closely together, super exciting. If not, super happy that if I in any way helped you guys shape your path. I do think that my advice to you would be build your own thing, build your own path, and then I think you'll be in a great spot in a year and 2 years and 3 years. And then just keep an eye on that run rate. Keep an eye on how what I did back in the days when we started was I sat down with my wife. We said, for how long can we sustain me not really making any money? One, do we say now it's getting too tight? For us, that was we had 2 children. So for us, it was when we were down to only having 6 months of personal runway left, we would have to reevaluate and look each other in the eye and say, okay, maybe I should start building bridges towards going back into being employed, right? But we also had 2 children, right? And we had a house, a mortgage, everything, right? So we should not end up in the situation where we didn't have enough money to come by or to go through life on. If I were in your position, being the 2 of you, I'd be much more aggressive, right? Not meaning that I would just churn up the runway, but I would say I'm willing to run all the way up until 2 months before.
For how long can we sustain?
Because but that's the thing. You need to figure out that number, and then every month or so you look at it and say, has this moved? Every time we made a bit of money, that moved the run rate, right? Now we are in a position where we probably have in the company for, even with our salary today, for 2 years. And we've increased our salary 3 times since when we didn't make much money. And that's a very comfortable position and a great place to be at. But it's also necessary when you're starting to build out and deciding what initiatives that you want to do, that some might be capital intensive. We're oftentimes talking about almost buying a little village and then making that into a venture hub. Because Europe has these great distances where if you're in a less central place, you have villages practically empty, right? There's not even like 300K could probably buy you a small village some places, right? Just need to make sure that you can then get Starlink there.
I see how every conversation leads to like house buying at the end.
Every conversation always ends up at mortgaging your house. That's life.